Welcome to Court Climate. We cover a chilling case from March 18, 1988 that unfolded on Coon Dog Cemetery Road in Colbert County, Alabama. Reverend Charles Sennett, a minister with the Church of Christ, came upon a horrifying scene that day: the lifeless body of his wife, Elizabeth Dorleen Sennett, within their own home. The investigation revealed that Elizabeth had been brutally attacked, suffering 8 stab wounds to her chest and additional wounds on each side of her neck, alongside numerous other abrasions and cuts. The coroner concluded that the cause of death was the multiple stab wounds inflicted upon her chest and neck. As the case unraveled, shocking evidence came to light. Charles Sennett had orchestrated a sinister plot involving Billy Gray Williams, Smith, and John Forrest Parker, hiring them to murder his wife for a fee of $1,000 each. The motive behind this heinous act was as disturbing as the murder itself. Sennett was embroiled in an affair, drowning in debt, and had recently taken out a large insurance policy on his wife's life. Just a week after Elizabeth's murder, as the investigation began to zero in on him, Charles Sennett chose to end his own life. Here are the details written in Kenneth Eugene Smith's written statement, final brief, of Alabama's motion to set an execution date.
About 1 month prior to March 18, 1988, I was contacted by Billy Williams. Billy came over to my house and we talked out on the front porch. It was late afternoon. Billy said that he knew someone that wanted somebody hurt. Billy said that the person wanted to pay to have it done. Billy said the person would pay $1,500 to do the job. I think I told Billy I would think about it and get back with him. Billy lives at the corner of Tuscaloosa Street and Cypress Street near the telephone company. Billy drives a red and white Thunderbird. Billy and I are good friends. Billy and I talked about this several times before I agreed to do it. I had already talked with John Parker about helping me. I think I first met Charles Sennett about 2 weeks prior to the murder. Billy arranged the meeting. At the time I met Mr. Sennett, I did not know who he was. I did not ask his name, and he did not ask what my name was. Mr. Sennett told me that he wanted somebody taken care of. Mr. Sennett said that the person would be at home, that they never had any visitors. Mr. Sennett said that the house was out in the country. At that time, I just listened to his proposal and told him I would get back with him. When we talked, we sat in Mr. Sennett's truck in front of Billy's apartment. I gave him my phone number. Mr. Sennett called me a couple of times to see if I had made a decision. Sometime between the Monday prior to the murder and the Thursday prior to the murder, Mr. Sennett learned that John and I would do what he wanted. I met with Mr. Sennett on Tuesday prior to the murder in the coffee house at ECM. At this meeting, Mr. Sennett drew me a diagram of his house and told me that his wife and he would be out of town on Wednesday to go down to the house and look around. By the time Sennett and I met at ECM, I had learned through conversations with him that it was his wife that he wanted killed, and the price agreed was $1,000 each. $1,000 each for Billy Williams, John Parker, and I. The next meeting was on Thursday prior to the murder in front of Billy's apartment again. Billy, Mr. Sennett, and I sat in Mr. Sennett's silver car and talked. I don't recall what time it was exactly. I think it was in the morning. At this meeting, Sennett gave me $200 and showed us the rest of the money. $200 was for anything. We needed to do the job. John Parker sat in my car while Billy and I talked with Mr. Sennett. The murder was supposed to look like a burglary that went bad. This was Mr. Sennett's idea. Sennett told me to take whatever I wanted from the house. It was agreed for John and I to do the murder, and then come back to Billy's apartment, to Billy's house, and get the rest of our money. This meeting only lasted a short while. Sennett told us that he would be gone from 8:30 until noon. Then on Friday, John and I got together around 8:30. We were in John's car, a Pontiac Grand Prix Gold. John drove to Muscle Shoals, then I drove down to the Sennett house. John had brought a black handle survival knife and a black holster. At this time, we still did not know how we were going to kill Mrs. Sennett. John and I got to the Sennett house around 9:30, I think. I parked at the back of the house near a little patio that led into the house. I went to a door to the left of the car. I think there was a white freezer nearby. I knocked on the door, and Mrs. Sennett came to the door. I told Mrs. Sennett that her husband had told us that we could come down and look around the property to see about hunting on it. Mrs. Sennett asked my name. I told her I was Kenny Smith. She went to the phone and called her husband and came back and told us it was okay to look around. John and I looked around the property for a while, then came back to the house. John and I went back to the door. We told Mrs. Sennett we needed to use the bathroom and she let us inside. I went to the bathroom nearest the kitchen and then John went to the bathroom. I stood at the edge of the kitchen talking with Mrs. Sennett. Mrs. Sennett was sitting at a chair in the den. Then I heard John coming through the house. John walked up behind Mrs. Sennett and started hitting her. John was hitting her with his fist. I started getting the VCR while John was beating Mrs. Sennett. John hit Mrs. Sennett with a large cane and anything else he could get his hands on. John went into a frenzy. Mrs. Sennett was yelling, "Just stop, we could have anything we wanted." As John was beating up Mrs. Sennett, I messed up some things in the house to make it look like a burglary. I took the VCR out to the car. The last place I saw Mrs. Sennett, she was lying near the fireplace covered with some kind of blanket. I had gone outside to look in the storage buildings when I saw John run out to the pond and throw some things in it. I also took a small stereo from the house, also. I don't know what brand it was or where in the house I got it. The VCR was a Samsung. I got it from under the TV set in the den. When John got back to the car, we drove back to Billy's apartment to get our money. On the way back, John told me that he had stabbed her once in the neck. I never stabbed Mrs. Sennett at all. When John and I got to Billy's, we were given $900 apiece. Billy gave us the money. At the time of the murder, I never knew Charles Sennett's name or his wife's. It was only when it came out in the newspaper that I learned the name of the lady that was killed and Charles Sennett. I took the Samsung VCR home with me. The last time I saw the stereo, it was in John's car. It was around noon when we got to Billy's apartment. Then on Thursday, my house was searched by investigators and they found the VCR. I was brought to the Colbert County Courthouse where I was advised of my rights. After being advised of my rights, I gave Investigator May this written statement.
Smith, despite attempts to downplay his involvement, never denied his role in the crime. He openly admitted to being hired for the murder, confirming his willing participation in this heinous act. Smith's legal battle began with his indictment by the grand jury of Colbert County, Alabama, on April 7, 1988, for capital murder. The charge was severe, citing the murder was committed for financial gain, a crime considered capital under Alabama law. The initial trial took place in Jefferson County, leading to a conviction of capital murder on November 3, 1989, with the jury recommending the death penalty. However, this verdict was not the end, but rather the beginning of a lengthy legal process. In 1992, an appeal led to a retrial due to concerns over jury selection bias, as determined by the Batson v. Kentucky decision. Despite being retried and convicted once more, the jury this time recommended life imprisonment without parole. Yet the court ultimately sentenced Smith to death, a decision that was upheld through various appeals, including attempts to reach the Supreme Court. Smith's legal odyssey continued with a Rule 32 petition, challenging his conviction and sentence under Alabama's criminal procedure rules. This lengthy post-conviction phase, filled with appeals and denials, highlighted the complexities of the legal system. Even after exhausting his appeals, Smith filed a federal habeas corpus petition, which was also denied. The debate over Smith's execution method brought to light the ongoing controversies surrounding capital punishment. Smith's execution was initially set for November 17, 2022, but faced delays due to issues with the lethal injection procedure. This led to a significant legal battle over the method of execution, with Smith requesting execution by nitrogen hypoxia, an authorized but untested method in Alabama. In a settlement that would etch his name in history, Smith agreed to a novel method of execution, nitrogen hypoxia. This process involves inhaling pure nitrogen gas, leading to death. The world watched as Smith became the first person to be executed by this method on January 25, 2024. His final appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court was rejected, sealing his fate.